Hey, my name is Naamil Gay. My pronouns are they, he, and I am the creator of The Tea Advocate. And I am so excited to be in conversation with my fellow South Asian trans siblings today. We're really going to be highlighting the South Asian trans experience, touching on how different intersecting identities such as religion, caste, and nationality impact the trans experience, as well as touching on how family dynamics impact the South Asian trans experience. And finally, we're going to be highlighting our lived experiences, because it's our lived experiences that not only liberate ourselves, but liberate our communities as a whole.
Perseverance and resistance within my own life as a South Asian transgender man looks like continuing to believe in myself and continuing to advocate for what I believe is the life I deserve, which is filled with joy, freedom, liberation. Another example is a very well-known, prominent trans activist figure within the Indian community named Lakshmi Narayan Tirupati. So she is at the forefront of the fight for a lot of trans rights, and a lot of her work includes advocacy for the community, the trans community specifically in the United Nations, and founding an organization which helps the upliftment of sexual minorities like trans folks.
Some of the examples of perseverance and resistance that I have seen in the South Asian trans community are the Khwaja Sirans, or the transgender community in Pakistan and India. I love how they are known for making music, bringing music and dance and creativity into people's life, injecting joy into people's lives. In the South Asian community, I feel like there has been this lost knowledge of the trans community. However, there are still reminiscences of it. For example, it's a well-known expression like you mustn't annoy or upset a trans person, because equal to their prayers for you, if they curse you, those are known to come true. This is something that has actually happened to me when I was a teenager. The class bully, you could call him. Everyone sort of knew he was annoying, but then he always was lovable enough to have around. But he said something extremely transphobic to me, and I cursed him, and the curse came true within hours of me saying it. And I know this because there's proof of it, obviously, and he never bullied me again. So I guess I'm concerned with the mysticism and music and dance and creativity and art are sacred, and trans people are sacred too.
Hey everyone, my name is Samir. My pronouns are he, they, it, and I identify as desi and transmasculine. If you're on here watching this, you're probably well aware that there's very little representation for people that are South Asian and transgender. Off the top of my head, I could probably only think of like 4 or 5 people, one of them being Alok, who is doing great things using their platform to spread awareness that like, hey, we're here and we're queer. And I feel like at this stage of being South Asian and transgender, overall, perseverance and resistance looks like that. It looks like using your voice, participating in organizations that celebrate our existence like Desi Rainbow, Satarangi, and offering support to people that share our identities, regardless of helping them figure out if they're still figuring out where they're at in their transition. Supporting your trans elders too, because that's not an easy task. That's a heavy weight to bear, Generally, being there for the community and speaking up for the community is the best way to do that, in my opinion. And that could also inspire positive change because, be the representation you never had. That's what I tell myself, is I'm gonna be the representation I never had.
There are many examples of perseverance and resistance within the South Asian trans community. In South Asia, the hijra is a common term that is used to describe third gender individuals that live in communities that comprise of transgender and intersex people. Now, hijras were initially hailed as godlike, as divine, as trusted guardians during the Mughal dynasty. However, being hijra was actually criminalized by the British Raj, which forced them into hiding, and the caste system, which pushed them out. However, Hijras still exist to this day. So although Hijras were once hailed as godlike and were part of the natural order and were trusted within South Asian society, this colonization by the British not only depicted Hijras as abnormal, but also resulted in continuous harassment, attacks, and threats towards the Hijra community, which we see to this day. Hijras continue to exist. Trans people continue to exist. And that's why our lived experiences are so important. The lived experiences that have been erased throughout history, they are vital. Our lived experiences as trans people, as trans South Asian people, we are writing history. We are continuing history. Lived experiences hold such power. They change not only our lives, but the lives of others.
Intersecting identities such as socioeconomic status, religion, caste, and nationality impact the experiences of South Asian trans people so much. Can you imagine being in a lower caste? The amount of resources that these folks have are slim to none. Now add being transgender on top of that. It makes it extremely difficult to access birth, deserved, and given resources such as healthcare, legal rights, access to so much, jobs, work, recreational activities, healthcare, anything and everything. So can you imagine, like, if people are already being discriminated against because they are in a lower socioeconomical status, because they are in a lower part of the caste system, because their nationality isn't the main nationality, it's not being identified by the country that they live in, they are gonna face compounding discrimination upon the discrimination that they're already facing. It's already so hard for folks in those spaces to access, again, birth given and birth deserved rights and resources like medical care, legal rights, jobs, well-being, resources to things that we all deserve.
It impacts South Asian trans people a lot because we are the most marginalized of our community. So I'm going to speak about it in terms of being a creative, a musician. There is a real lack of support within the community. In terms of like the UK, it's a very small country and there's a huge competition for the resources that are available, which are minimum. There is a lack of visibility of South Asian people in the creative scene, let alone trans South Asian people. So it's very small. I always feel like the way to combat this is to create zones of, or safe zones of network that are beyond your own country. Like, it's always good to reach out, branch out to other trans people abroad, for example. Because I lived in Pakistan for 1 year when I was 11, I naturally sort of gravitate towards building bridges with other cultures outside of the one that I'm in. I feel like that is a life jacket for a lot of us, because there is a real lack of care when it comes to nurturing South Asian trans artists.
External factors such as religion and caste can add an even more confusing layer to this enigma that's already, being South Asian and trans. And I feel like religion specifically, like, even if your family's like more strict or has a certain interpretation of the religious readings versus less strict, like my family, you're still gonna be thinking about it because subconsciously you were raised with some sort of implication, some sort of history of religion too. And as I transitioned, I was like, oh, would my God approve of this? Would my family, who is more religious, approve of me? And I had to think about that aspect too. Similarly with caste, even though, you may not be super strict about it, or it's not super prevalent anymore in some cases, it still has an impact on the mentality that your family has. And that is what makes it more confusing in my opinion. And there's, different challenges with lower caste or higher caste, but there's still challenges either way, because the caste system itself creates challenges. So, just makes everything more confusing, even if you don't subscribe to it.
So there are many ways that intersecting identities impact the experiences of South Asian transgender people. For me, as a South Asian trans-masc person, religion had a big impact on my transitioning and my coming out. Although I consider myself to follow more of a spiritual path, some members of my family were very, very religious, followed Catholicism and Christianity. When I was little, I was told that queer people belonged in mental institutions. When I transitioned, I was treated as if I didn't exist anymore. I actually was basically disowned by my family, and that had a big impact on my trans experience. Being surrounded by very traditional values had such a big impact on me finding myself, on me connecting with myself, on me loving myself, treating myself with kindness, had a really big impact on me coming to terms with my own gender identity. I am really lucky to have a South Asian mother and older sibling who are the most supportive people in the entire world. Although I did have religious family members who did leave me just due to my identity, I did have my mom and my sister there with me every step of the way, and they are my biggest allies.
I believe that a lot of South Asian cultures censor collectivism. And within that means censoring your family. That means censoring the collective, the family unit. That means procreation, right? That means continuing the family lineage. That means doing what's best for your family to continue to be successful. That means marriage, right? Oftentimes becoming a lawyer, doctor, engineer is a very stereotypical way to see it, but it is something that is so ingrained within our culture. And that impacts coming out, because if I focus on my individual life and what I want to make me happy, and not even to make me happy, to make me feel at home within my body, to make me feel like I matter, to make me feel like I don't want to kill myself because I am unhappy with what I was born into, that becomes in direct conflict with collectivism and what we are taught from young to take care of our parents and take care of our family and to continue our family lineage, to make our family proud, to not bring shame into our family, to work extremely hard, because it can look very selfish on the outside looking in when we censor our own joy and liberation as transgender people. But in fact, the happier we are, the more liberated we are, the more we can add and be of service to our families, the more we can be present with our families, the more we can share joy with our families. And I don't think a lot of folks, especially South Asian folks, are recognizing that. I want South Asian people to know that when you stand unapologetically behind your transgender child and you show that you are not backing down, that you are firm in your boundaries and you will not tolerate disrespect of any kind, whether it's about you supporting someone who's LGBTQ or even your trans child, other South Asian people will be forced to confront their own shame, their own beliefs, and some of the things that they have been taught that are completely not related to transgender people. There are so many beautiful South Asian transgender people out there. Please get involved. Please educate yourself. Think about the South Asian transgender people in the rooms where they're not even thinking about us. We're not just here for June. We're not just here for Pride. We live, thrive, and survive 365 days all year round.
I think about this kind of thing often because as much as I like the idea of community, as much as I like to think that community is there to lift you up, to give you a safe and a stable foundation from which you can spring yourself forth and do your thing and thus help the community also rise. I have found quite often, and probably due to the recent history of South Asia, is that communities are almost suffocating. They are not actually designed for you to as trans people, we live on the fringes anyway, so these communities can hold you back because it's there's too much emphasis on like what the rest of society will think of us. And I do think that this is something that stems from the trauma of colonization, because living with the British Empire, as in these white people alongside us for hundreds of years, I think that it's a deprogramming that we all have to go through. That of course you had to live in fear when you were living with the British Empire in India. South Asians had to live in fear every single day, and what that has done to our South Asian collective is that it has made it sort of like an automatic thought process where there is an overemphasis on how other people will perceive. It's kind of like a displaced trauma which needs healing and it needs addressing, and the way that you can do that is by talking about it and bringing awareness to it. And I think as trans people, we, especially South Asian trans people, we have had to heal that within ourselves in order to break out of those toxic communities and family structures that don't let you be yourself, your authentic self. You know, we've had to decolonize our brains, and we've had to understand that putting another person's or another group of people's opinions of us above our true authentic expression of self is harmful to us. So we can lead the way and show others how it's done, basically by living fulfilled, beautiful, authentic lives, trans lives.
In a lot of South Asian families, it's pretty common to see like blindly accepted sexism, misogyny, and extreme emphasis on gender, which can all make coming out as transgender pretty challenging. Because when I was transitioning, I went from female to male, so what I heard from a lot of my family was, we finally have a son, finally have a nephew, and therefore, you know, there wasn't that much protest. I always think about, what if I was trans feminine? Would I have been as accepted, or would they have seen me as like inferior? Would I have had more challenges, you know? Because there is a certain privilege that comes with being trans masculine instead of trans feminine. Because then you have to deal with things like trans misogyny, and God knows when you're South Asian, you internalize a lot of that misogyny, because that's just how you grow up oftentimes. That could make coming out, regardless of what you're coming out as, non-binary, trans-masc, the extreme emphasis on gender makes it really difficult. We can foster greater acceptance in today's world. After our generation, or generally overall, we could do away with this like emphasis on gender and just like coexist like how our ancestors wanted us to. You know, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. Love y'all.
So how do family dynamics and societal expectations impact the coming out process for South Asian trans folks? Well, I already touched on how my family impacted my coming out process and how lucky I am to have my mom and my sister. But in terms of societal expectations, I think that we grow up in a society where we are told, especially within South Asian society, that if you were born female, you were expected to be a nurturer and a caretaker. To grow up as a woman, as a man, you were expected to be the provider. As I said before, trans people were trusted by South Asian society, and it is colonization and the binary that pushed us out of South Asian society, yet we still exist. You know, I think that recounting our history, I think that telling our history, elevating our history, and elevating our lived experiences will really foster greater acceptance in today's world, because all we need is support and to know that we have always existed. For myself, I really didn't know any other South Asian trans people until I connected with them over social media. And that had a huge impact on me, just connected with my identity and with myself. So in order to create, a more accepting world for trans folks, we need to uplift our lived experiences. Thank you so much to my trans siblings for being in conversation with me today. Thank you so much for listening in, and if you have the opportunity, please uplift this conversation, because as we said before, it's our lived experiences that liberate not only ourselves, but our communities as a whole.